Some patients walk through my door carrying their pain like luggage. Heavy, visible, undeniable. But the man who entered my office that day, his burden wasn't something you could see. It was carved into him, etched into the way he moved, the way he breathed, the way he existed in the world. He was 44, maybe 45. When he sat down, the first thing I noticed was how he sat. Not relaxed, not comfortable. He perched on the edge of the chair as if ready to spring into action at any moment. His back, straight as a board. His shoulders locked in place. His hands rested on his knees, fingers slightly curled, positioned, ready. "I appreciate you seeing me, Dr. Bennett," he said. His politeness felt rehearsed. The words were memorized, mechanical. I can't live a normal life anymore." "Can you tell me a bit more about that?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He took a deep breath. His chest rose, then fell too quickly. He blinked several times rapidly. "I can't go outside, I can't go into crowds. When someone yells behind me..." He paused, swallowed. "I throw myself on the ground. People look at me like I'm crazy, but I'm just trying to stay alive, for 22 years. And after that sentence, there was silence. Such a deep silence that inside it, a war was still echoing. Before he continued speaking, he turned his head toward the window. Outside, there was traffic. Normal cars, normal people. A normal Tuesday afternoon. But the way his eyes tracked each vehicle, the way his jaw clenched when a motorcycle passed, nothing about him was normal. Hadn't been for 22 years. His fingers twitched, just slightly, an involuntary movement he tried to hide by pressing his palms harder against his knees. "We hit a mine," he finally said. His voice dropped, became hollow. "Iraq, 2003. There were 8 of us in the vehicle." He stopped. The sentence hung there, incomplete. I waited. They all went. Another pause, longer this time. I stayed. His hand started trembling, a slight shake that spread from his fingers to his wrist. He noticed it, clenched his fist tighter, tried to make it stop. It didn't stop. My sergeant had warned us beforehand. The words came faster now, pressured. He said, "Let's do a route clearance." But I was the lieutenant. I made the call. His voice cracked on the word call. We were in a hurry. We had to complete the mission. And now, he couldn't finish. His throat worked, swallowing nothing. His eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Not yet. 7 of my friends are in the ground and I'm here, sitting in your office, breathing, eating, existing. Why? He looked directly at me for the first time. Why am I alive? Why me? Why not them? The trembling had spread to his shoulders now. His whole body was fighting something invisible. Some of my patients heal as they share their stories. But some stories, they never leave my mind. Today I'm going to tell you one of those lives. If you're listening to this story and you also have things you can't keep inside, share what's going through your mind and where you're listening from in the comments. I read every comment. I hear every story. If you want to stay updated on the therapy stories, I can't forget. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If this story touches your feelings, you can support me by liking it. One day, I want to hear your story too. If you want me to share your story in my next video, you can send your story to the email address on my profile. Remember, our stories heal, even just a little, when they're shared. What you're about to hear isn't just about an explosion. It's about what happens when a single decision echoes through 2 decades. When guilt becomes so heavy it rewires your brain. When your body keeps fighting a war that ended 22 years ago. This man, let's call him Marcus, hasn't walked on a main street in 3 years. Not because he's physically unable, but because his nervous system believes that any open space could kill him, that any crowd could hide a threat, that any loud noise is the beginning of the end. When I asked him about his daily life, his hand started shaking. When I mentioned his son, his voice broke. And when he finally told me about that day in Iraq, the day everything changed, I understood why he'd spent 2 decades building walls around himself. But here's what I noticed in that first session, something he didn't even realize. Underneath all that guilt, underneath all that pain, there was still a man fighting to come back. A father who wanted to see his son graduate. A human being who was exhausted from punishing himself. This isn't a story about weakness. It's a story about what trauma does to the bravest among us, about how the mind protects itself, and sometimes, how that protection becomes a prison. You'll hear about the moment that changed everything, about the 7 men who didn't make it home, about the sergeant who was right, about the decision that can't be undone, and about a man learning, slowly, painfully, to forgive himself for being human. But first, you need to understand something about post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not about being crazy. It's not about being weak. It's about a nervous system that learned, in a moment of extreme danger, how to survive, and then couldn't unlearn it. Stay with me. This story goes places you won't expect. His name was Marcus Webb, former Lieutenant, United States Army, 44 years old, 2 decades out of service, but every cell in his body still remembered. The way he'd entered my office told me everything before he'd spoken a single word. He'd paused at the threshold, not hesitating, assessing. His eyes had swept the room in a pattern. Windows, exits, blind spots, potential threats. Military. Fingers spread slightly. If he needed to move, he could launch himself up in half a second. I noticed his breathing. Shallow. Controlled. The kind of breathing you do when you're trying not to make noise, when you're trying to be invisible. How long have you been struggling with this? I asked. His eyes flicked to me, then away. To the window again, always to the window. Since Iraq. But it got worse about 3 years ago. What happened 3 years ago? His jaw tightened. The muscles along his neck corded. I tried to go to the grocery store middle of the day, Saturday. It was crowded. He paused, drew in air through his nose. There was a family. Kids. Balloons. One of them, a red balloon, it popped. He stopped talking. His chest was rising and falling faster now. And, I prompted gently, and I hit the ground, right there, in the produce section, face down, hands over my head. His voice had gone flat, emotionless, dissociative. I laid there until someone touched my shoulder, asked if I needed an ambulance, the look on their face. He shook his head once, sharp. I haven't been back. Haven't been to any store during business hours since. What Marcus was describing is a classic startle response, hypervigilance combined with an exaggerated acoustic startle reflex. His amygdala, the brain's fear center, had been conditioned to associate unexpected loud noises with imminent death. When that balloon popped, his conscious mind knew he was in a grocery store in suburban America. But his limbic system, the primitive part of his brain responsible for survival, reacted as if he were back in Iraq under attack. This isn't weakness. This is neurobiology. His brain had learned in the most visceral way possible that loud noises mean death. And once that neural pathway is carved, it's extraordinarily difficult to undo. The grocery store incident wasn't an overreaction, it was his nervous system doing exactly what it had been trained to do. Protect him from danger at all costs. Tell me about your daily routine, I said. He shifted in his seat, just barely. But I caught it. The micro-movement of discomfort, of shame. I wake up at 0500, old habits. His voice had taken on a mechanical quality. First thing I do is check the perimeter, all the windows, both doors, fire escape. Make sure nothing's been disturbed. Then I make coffee. How long does the perimeter check take? 20 minutes, maybe 30 if something feels off. And what does feels off mean? His eyes narrowed slightly. A sound I didn't account for. A shadow that wasn't there yesterday. The neighbor's car parked at a different angle. He paused. I know how it sounds, I know it's irrational, but I can't not do it. What happens if you try not to do it? His hands formed fists. I tried once. Told myself I was being ridiculous, that I lived in a safe neighborhood, that there were no IEDs in suburban Virginia. His breathing had quickened. I made it 10 minutes, then the panic hit. Heart racing, couldn't breathe, sweating, shaking, had to check, had to make sure. He looked at me then, really looked at me. I'm a prisoner in my own mind, Dr. Bennett, and I don't know how to escape. Do you work? I asked. From home, computer programming. I'm good at it, quiet, solitary, nobody asks questions. He shifted again, that same micro-movement. I haven't been to an office in 8 years. What about groceries? You mentioned you can't go during the day. I go at night, after midnight, 24-hour stores. I drive there, park as close to the entrance as possible, get what I need, leave. Takes maybe 15 minutes, but even that, he trailed off. Even that what? Even that exhausts me. The whole drive there I'm watching everything. Every car behind me, every car that passes, every person on the sidewalk. Making sure no one's following me, making sure I'm not being set up. His hands opened and closed rhythmically. Open, closed, open, closed. When I get home, I have to sit in my car for 20 minutes before I can go inside, just to make sure I wasn't followed, to make sure it's safe. Marcus's life had contracted to the size of his apartment. This is tragically common in severe PTSD. The sufferer's world shrinks and shrinks until there's almost nothing left. Every expansion feels dangerous. Every new environment presents 1,000 potential threats. What struck me most was his awareness. He knew these behaviors were excessive. He knew, intellectually, that his suburban neighborhood wasn't a war zone. But trauma doesn't live in the intellectual brain. It lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the parts of us that react before we can think. His hypervigilance wasn't a choice. It was a survival mechanism that had outlived its usefulness, but couldn't turn itself off. Like a smoke alarm that keeps blaring long after the fire is out. "You mentioned you're divorced," I said carefully. Something changed in his face. The muscles around his eyes tightened. His lips pressed together into a thin line. 8 years ago. She tried. God, she really tried. His voice was thick now. But I couldn't be what she needed. Couldn't go to her work parties. Couldn't go to restaurants. Couldn't even sit in our own living room if the TV was on. Too much stimulus, too many sounds. "What broke you apart?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. She wanted to go to a 4th of July celebration. Fireworks. The whole neighborhood went every year. It was tradition. He swallowed hard. I couldn't do it. I begged her not to go. Told her we could watch from home. Yeah, but she was tired of accommodating me. Tired of living in my prison. So she went. She went. Took our son, and I stayed home in the dark with earplugs in, still hearing every explosion, still flinching, still back there. He looked up at me. When they came home, she said she wanted a divorce, said she couldn't watch me disappear anymore, said our son deserved a father who could actually live. "Tell me about your son," I said softly. For the first time since entering my office, Marcus's rigid posture broke, his shoulders dropped just slightly, his hands unclenched. Something soft entered his expression, mixing with the pain. "Daniel? He's 17 now." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Smart kid? Really smart. Going to college next year, got a full ride to Virginia Tech." "That's impressive. He's impressive. Despite," he gestured vaguely at himself, "despite having a father who can't show up for him. When was the last time you saw him?" 2 months ago. He comes to me. I can't go to him. Can't drive to his mother's house. Too many roads I don't know. Too many variables." His voice cracked. "His graduation is in 2 months. He asked me to come, and I don't know if I can." "What are you afraid will happen?" "Everything." The word came out harsh, desperate. "The auditorium will be packed, hundreds of people, loud, chaotic. What if there's a balloon? What if someone slams a door? What if a car backfires in the parking lot?" His breathing was becoming irregular. "What if I lose it in front of everyone? In front of him? What if he has to watch his father throw himself on the ground like a... He couldn't finish. His hand went to his chest, pressing hard. "Marcus," I said firmly. "Look at me. You're here. You're in my office. You're safe." He blinked rapidly, nodded. Slowly his breathing evened out. The loss of his relationship with his son might have been more devastating than the explosion itself. Combat trauma is catastrophic, but it's often the secondary losses, the job, the marriage, the connections, that destroy quality of life. Marcus hadn't just lost 7 men in Iraq. He'd lost his wife, his relationship with his son, his career, his social life, his sense of safety, and his identity as a capable man. Each loss reinforced the core belief trauma had carved into him. I am broken. I am dangerous to be around. I am not worthy of love or connection. These beliefs were more insidious than the flashbacks, more painful than the nightmares. They were the prison within the prison. "I need to ask you something difficult," I said. "About Iraq. About the explosion." His entire body tensed, every muscle locked, his eyes fixed on a point behind me, through me, to somewhere else entirely. "We don't have to talk about it today," I continued, "but eventually, we will need to." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then, "I think about it every day. Every single day. The exact moment, the exact words." "What words?" His hands started trembling again. He pressed them harder against his thighs, trying to stop the shaking. It didn't stop. Sergeant Morrison, he was driving, and he said, Marcus's voice became thin, strained. Sir, we should sweep this road. Intelligence reported IED activity in this sector. And I said, he stopped, swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbed. What did you say, Marcus? A single tear broke free, running down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. Didn't seem to notice it. I said, we don't have time. We're already behind schedule. Let's move. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. And 2 minutes later he whispered, we hit the mine. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of guilt, full of grief, full of 22 years of unanswered questions. I let it sit. Sometimes the most important thing a therapist can do is simply bear witness to someone's pain, without trying to fix it, explain it, or diminish it. His breathing had changed. Faster, shallower. His pupils were dilated. He was dissociating. His mind was traveling back to that road. Marcus, I said gently, stay with me, stay here. He blinked. Once, twice. Slowly he came back. Do you remember the explosion itself? I asked. He nodded. His jaw clenched so hard I could hear his teeth grinding. The sound. He stopped. Started again. The sound wasn't like the movies. It wasn't dramatic. It was deep. Felt like the earth was opening up. Like God himself was tearing the world apart. His hands began to shake violently now. He gripped his knees, knuckles white. And then white. Just white. Everything white and ringing. So much ringing. He touched his ear absently. I still hear it sometimes. Even now. High-pitched. Constant. What's the next thing you remember? I was outside the vehicle. Don't know how I got there. Don't remember getting out. His eyes were distant now, unfocused. The Humvee was on fire. Black smoke, thick, couldn't see through it, and the smell. He stopped, his throat worked. For a moment I thought he might be sick. The smell of burning metal, and burning. He couldn't say it. Other things. His chest was heaving now. Quick, shallow breaths. Hyperventilating. I tried to get back to the vehicle, tried to get to them, but the heat and then hands, someone was pulling me, dragging me away, and I was screaming, fighting them, because my men were in there. My men were burning and I was. His voice shattered completely, his shoulders shook, but still he wouldn't let himself cry, wouldn't allow himself that release. Marcus, I said softly, it's okay to cry. No. The word came out sharp, hard. No, it's not. They died. They burned alive in that vehicle, and I lived. I don't get to cry. I don't get to feel sorry for myself. This is the core wound. Survivor's guilt so profound it had become a kind of penance. Marcus believed that his survival was a moral failure, that by living when his men died he had committed an unforgivable sin. So he'd built a life that was barely life at all. A half-existence, a punishment. The prohibition against crying, against grieving, against feeling, that wasn't strength. That was a continuation of the trauma. He was still at war, still on that burning road, still trying to undo what couldn't be undone. Did you attend their funerals? I asked. He shook his head. I was in the hospital, burns on my arms and legs, shrapnel in my back. Took 3 months before they released me. By then, they'd all been buried. He reached back unconsciously, touching his lower back where the scars must be. Have you visited their graves? Another head shake. More forceful this time. I've tried. 3 times I've driven to Arlington, parked outside the gates, but I can't make myself go in. What stops you? His hands formed fists again. What would I even say to them? Sorry I killed you because I was too impatient to wait 5 fucking minutes. The anger in his voice was sudden, volcanic. Good, anger I could work with. Anger meant he was feeling. Marcus, you didn't kill them. I gave the order to drive. You made a tactical decision based on... I ignored my sergeant's warning. His voice was rising now, filling the room. He had more experience than me. He'd been in country longer. He knew the terrain. He knew the risks. And I ignored him because I was worried about the goddamn schedule. He was standing now, pacing near the window. His movements were jerky, agitated. His hands opened and closed rhythmically. 7 men died because I couldn't wait 5 minutes. 7 men with families, with wives and kids and parents and futures, all gone because of me. I let him pace, let him burn off the anger. This was progress, actually. For months, maybe years, he'd been numb, shut down. This emotion, raw as it was, meant something was breaking open. After several minutes he sat back down, exhausted, hollowed out. Tell me about them, I said. Not about the explosion. Tell me about them as people. He looked at me, confused. Because they weren't just 7 men. They were individuals, with names, with personalities. Tell me who they were. He was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly he began. Sergeant James Morrison, 34, from Dallas, had a wife, Emily, and 3 daughters, 8, 6, and 4 years old. His voice was soft now, almost tender. He kept their pictures taped to the dashboard, used to kiss each one before every mission. Every single mission. He paused, breathed. He was the one who wanted to check the road. He was smart, experienced, patient. Marcus's voice cracked. I should have listened to him. Who else? Corporal Ryan Jensen, 22, just married 3 weeks before deployment. His wife, Sarah, was pregnant. He used to joke that he was on his honeymoon with us instead of with her. A ghost of a smile, bitter and sad. His son was born 4 months after he died. He never met him. Each name was a weight. Each story another stone in the monument of his guilt. Private First Class Carlos Ramirez, 19 years old, wanted to be a high school teacher after his service. Used to read during every spare moment, always had a book. Even in the Humvee that day, he was reading. Specialist David Thompson, our medic, 26, had saved dozens of lives during our deployment. Couldn't save himself. Corporal Michael Davis, 24, funniest guy in the unit, could make anyone laugh even in the worst situations. Even when we were exhausted, scared, he'd crack a joke. Private First Class Justin Anderson, 20, artist, drew everything, sketched portraits of all of us. He was going to study art in college. His drawings were beautiful. Private Eli Williams, 18 years old, youngest in our unit, fresh out of basic training. It was his first real deployment. His mother had begged him not to enlist. She was right to beg. When he finished, tears were streaming down his face. Finally, he was letting himself grieve. They all had lives, he whispered, futures, families waiting for them, and they're all gone, because I was too fucking impatient to wait 5 minutes. This was a breakthrough moment. Painful, but necessary. By speaking their names, by remembering them as individuals rather than abstract symbols of his guilt, Marcus was beginning to honor their humanity. And in honoring their humanity, he was taking the first step toward honoring his own. Grief is love with nowhere to go. For 22 years, Marcus had locked his love for these men inside a box labeled guilt. But love and guilt are different. Love says, their lives mattered. Guilt says, their deaths were my fault. By letting himself grieve, really grieve, he was beginning to separate the two. What would they say to you? I asked quietly. If they could speak to you right now, what would Sergeant Morrison say? Marcus shook his head violently. I can't. Yes, you can. You knew these men. You served with them. You know their voices. What would Morrison say? He closed his eyes. His jaw worked. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. He'd say it wasn't my fault. Would he? Yes, he would. He'd say it was an IED. Could have happened to anyone. Could have happened on any road. Marcus's voice was shaking. He'd say that's war. People die, and it's not always someone's fault. Would he blame you? A long pause, then in a whisper. No. Then why do you blame yourself? His eyes opened, met mine, and in them, I saw the question he'd been carrying for 22 years. How can I forgive myself when they're dead? Let's talk about how this affects your daily life, I said, shifting the focus. You mentioned you can't walk on main streets. Tell me more about that. Marcus wiped his eyes roughly, almost angry at himself for crying. I haven't been on a main street, any main street, in 3 years. Not walking anyway. What happens when you try? His hands started their rhythmic opening and closing again. My chest gets tight, can't breathe, heart starts racing, feel like I'm going to die, or pass out, or both. And what do you do when you feel that way? I have to get to the edges, to the buildings, to the walls. He demonstrated with his hand, pressing it flat against an imaginary wall. I can only move if there's something solid behind me, something protecting my 6. Your 6? My back. Military slang. You always have to watch your 6, your rear. He looked at me. If my back is exposed, if I'm in the open, I'm a target. Every instinct in my body is screaming, get to cover. Even though intellectually you know you're not in danger, doesn't matter what I know, my body knows differently. This is the insidious nature of PTSD, the disconnect between intellectual knowledge and somatic experience. Marcus's prefrontal cortex, the rational part of his brain, understood that suburban Virginia was not a war zone. But his amygdala, his limbic system, his autonomic nervous system, they hadn't gotten the memo. His need to stay near walls, to protect his back, wasn't paranoid in the clinical sense. It was a deeply ingrained survival strategy that his nervous system had learned when that strategy was actually necessary. The problem was, it couldn't unlearn it. "What about crowds?" I asked. His reaction was immediate. His breathing quickened, his pupils dilated. Just the word crowds was triggering him. "Can't do it at all." The words came out clipped tight. "Too many people, too much movement, too many variables I can't control." "What's the specific fear?" "Suicide bombers." I know it sounds insane. I know there aren't suicide bombers in Virginia. But when I see a crowd, when I see people pressed together, my brain immediately starts scanning. Who's wearing a heavy coat in summer? Who's wearing a backpack? Who's sweating? Who looks nervous? He was breathing faster now, caught in the memory of the feeling. And then someone bumps into me, or someone yells, or a phone rings too loud, and I have to get out. Have to escape. Last time I tried, about a year ago, I had a full panic attack in the mall. Couldn't breathe. Vision started closing in, had to run outside and sit in my car for 2 hours before I could drive home. "You mentioned that when someone yells behind you, you throw yourself to the ground," I said. "Tell me about that." He closed his eyes as if gathering strength to speak about it. "It's not just yelling, it's any loud, sudden noise. Car backfire, door slamming, fireworks, thunder, even," he paused, looking embarrassed, "even a book dropping. If I'm not expecting it, if it's sudden and loud, my body reacts before my brain can catch up." "What does that reaction feel like from the inside?" Like being electrocuted. Like every nerve in my body fires at once. There's no thought, no decision. Just boom. I'm on the ground. Hands over my head. Sometimes I don't even remember doing it. I just come back to awareness, and I'm lying face down on the floor, or the pavement, or wherever I am. His hands were shaking again as he spoke. "Last month, I was in my apartment. My neighbor slammed his car door in the parking lot, and I hit the deck. Literally threw myself behind my couch, and I stayed there, heart pounding, scanning for threats for probably 5 minutes before my brain caught up and realized it was just a car door." "How did you feel afterward?" "Humiliated. Angry. Broken." He looked at me. "I'm a 44-year-old man hiding behind my couch because someone closed a car door. What kind of life is that?" Marcus's acoustic startle reflex had become pathological. In a combat zone, this kind of hair trigger response can save your life. The soldier who hits the ground fastest when gunfire erupts is the soldier who survives. But in civilian life, this same response becomes a disability. What makes this particularly devastating is the lack of control. Marcus wasn't choosing to throw himself to the ground. His nervous system was hijacking his body, overriding his conscious will. This loss of agency, this sense that his own body was betraying him, was almost as traumatic as the original event. "Do you ever feel safe?" I asked. He thought about that for a long time. "In my apartment, with all the doors locked, all the windows checked, all the lights on, with my back to a wall and my eyes on the door. Then, sometimes, for brief moments, I feel something like safe. Only in your apartment. Only there. Nowhere else. The world outside is hostile territory. Every street is a potential ambush. Every crowd is a potential attack. Every car is a potential VB, vehicle-borne improvised explosive device." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I know how paranoid that sounds. I know I sound crazy. But my body doesn't care about logic. My body is convinced that I'm still at war, that the war never ended, that I just changed locations." "Tell me more about Daniel," I said, steering us back to his son. "You said he's 17. What's your relationship like with him?" The tension in Marcus's face softened just slightly. He's incredible. Despite everything, despite having a father who can't be there for him, he's strong, compassionate, smart as hell. "Do you see him often?" "Once a month, maybe. He comes to me. We order food, he picks it up because I can't, and we eat in my apartment, watch movies, talk." His voice grew quieter. "He never complains, never makes me feel bad about what I can't do. But I see it in his eyes, the disappointment, the sadness." "Have you talked to him about your PTSD?" "A little. When he was younger, his mother told him I was sick. That I had an illness that made it hard for me to go places. He asked me about it once, when he was maybe 12. Asked if I'd ever get better, and Marcus's voice cracked. I told him I didn't know, and he cried. My son cried because his father couldn't take him to a baseball game, or go to his school play, or do any of the normal dad things. The pain in his voice was visceral. His graduation is in 2 months. He gave me an invitation, asked me, begged me to come, and I said I'd try. But we both know what I'll try means. It means I won't be there. The secondary trauma, the loss of his role as a father, might have been more painful than the primary trauma. Combat PTSD doesn't just affect the veteran, it affects everyone in their orbit. Daniel was growing up with a father who was physically present but emotionally unavailable, who loved him but couldn't show up for him. What struck me was Marcus's awareness of his son's pain. He wasn't just suffering, he was watching his son suffer because of his suffering. This layered guilt about the explosion, guilt about his limitations, guilt about failing his son, had become a crushing weight. What would have to happen for you to attend Daniel's graduation? I asked. Marcus looked at me like I'd asked him to fly to the moon. I don't know if anything could make that possible. Humor me. If you could go, if you felt safe enough, what would need to be in place? He thought about it. Really thought about it. I'd need to scout the location beforehand, know where all the exits are, where I could sit, back row near a door. I'd need to know there's a quiet space I could escape to if I start to panic. He stopped, realizing how extensive the list was. I'd need the impossible. Or, I said gently, you'd need a plan and support, and maybe some tools to manage the anxiety when it comes. Something flickered in his eyes. Not hope exactly, but maybe the beginning of the idea that hope might be possible. I want to go back to Sergeant Morrison for a moment, I said. You said he'd tell you it wasn't your fault, but you don't believe that. How can I? Marcus's voice was raw. If I'd listened to him, they'd all be alive. Maybe. Or maybe the IED was on a different part of the road, and you would have hit it anyway. Or maybe you would have been ambushed during the route clearance. Or maybe... But we don't know that. He was getting agitated again. We know what did happen. We hit a mine. My men died. That's reality. You're right. That is reality. But there's another reality you're not seeing. What? That you were a lieutenant making decisions in a war zone with incomplete information and multiple competing priorities. That you were trained to complete your mission. That delaying to do route clearances wasn't always an option. That it should have been an option that time. He was standing again, pacing. Morrison had intelligence. He had a reason. And you had orders to reach your destination on time. You had mission parameters. You had a commanding officer expecting you to. I don't care about orders. His voice broke. I don't care about missions. 7 men are dead because I prioritized a schedule over their safety. The room rang with his anguish. This is the crux of Marcus's cognitive distortion. All or nothing thinking combined with an inflated sense of control. He believed that if he'd made a different decision, his men would have lived. But war doesn't work that way. Combat is chaos. Thousands of variables intersecting in ways no one can predict or control. The truth Marcus couldn't accept, was that he'd made a reasonable tactical decision given the information he had. Not a perfect decision, but a reasonable one. The problem was, in his mind, anything short of perfection was murder. Would you have blamed Morrison if he'd made the same call? I asked quietly. Marcus froze. What? If Morrison had been in command, if he'd made the decision to drive without checking, and you had died, would you blame him? The question hung in the air like smoke. That's different, he finally said. How? Because Morrison was experienced. He knew what he was doing. And you didn't? I was 23 years old, fresh out of officer candidate school. I had no business leading men into combat. But you did lead them, because that was your job, because someone had to, because that's how the military works. He didn't respond, just stood there, breathing hard, fists clenched. Marcus, answer my question. If Morrison had made that call and you had died, would you blame him from the grave? A long, long silence. Then in a whisper, no, I wouldn't. He was doing his job. He was following orders. He was. Marcus stopped. His eyes widened slightly. He was human, and humans make mistakes. Yes, I said, humans make mistakes, even in war. especially in war. Over the next several weeks, we continued meeting, and slowly, painfully slowly, things began to shift. I gave Marcus his first homework assignment. I want you to go outside, during the day, just to your mailbox, stand there for 1 minute, that's all. The terror on his face was immediate. I can't. You can. You don't have to do it perfectly. If you panic, come back inside. But try. He did try. The first time he made it halfway to the mailbox before his chest tightened and he had to retreat. But he tried again the next day. And the next. By the end of the week he could stand at his mailbox for 2 minutes without fleeing. How did it feel? I asked during our next session. Terrifying. My heart was racing the whole time. I was sweating, scanning the street for threats. But I did it. You did. And each time you do it, your nervous system is learning something new. What's it learning? That you can be outside during the day and survive. That the threat level isn't as high as your amygdala thinks it is. That you have more control than you believe. This is the foundation of exposure therapy. Gradually, systematically exposing the patient to feared stimuli in a safe, controlled way. Each successful exposure teaches the nervous system that the feared outcome doesn't occur. Over time, with repetition, the fear response diminishes. But it's not a straight line. There would be setbacks. Days when Marcus couldn't make it to the mailbox. Days when a loud noise would send him spiraling back to Iraq. Healing from trauma isn't linear. It's a spiral, circling back to old pain, but each time from a slightly higher vantage point. I want to give you another assignment, I said. Call Daniel. Not about anything important, just to say hello. The fear was back in his eyes. Different fear this time. What if he doesn't want to talk to me? What if he does? Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, I'll try. He called, and Daniel answered. And they talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. School, a movie Daniel had watched, the weather. Normal things, father-son things. When Marcus told me about it in our next session, his eyes were wet. He didn't sound angry or disappointed. He just sounded happy to hear from me. Of course he did. He's your son. He loves you. Even though I can't. Even though. Love doesn't require perfection, Marcus. It requires presence. And you're learning how to be present again. 3 months into our work together, something significant happened. Marcus walked into my office and sat down, and immediately I knew something had changed. His posture was different, still tense, but less rigidly defensive. I went to Arlington, he said without preamble. I looked up, surprised. The cemetery? He nodded. I drove there, like I've done before, but this time... He paused, swallowed. This time I didn't just sit in the parking lot, I got out of the car. You went inside? I went inside. I found Morrison's grave and I just stood there. His hands were clasped in his lap, fingers interlaced, knuckles white. But he was holding himself together. How did it feel? Terrible. And also, like I was finally doing something I should have done 20 years ago. He looked at me. I talked to him. Out loud. Probably looked crazy talking to a gravestone, but I needed to say it. What did you say? I said I was sorry, that I'd spend the rest of my life wishing I'd made a different choice. But that I was trying. Trying to live. Trying to be better. Trying to honor them by not wasting the life they didn't get to have. His voice cracked. And I think that's what he'd want. What they'd all want. This was enormous. By visiting the grave, by speaking to Morrison, Marcus was beginning the process of making peace with his past. Not forgetting it, not minimizing it, but accepting it as something that happened, something that can't be changed, and something that doesn't have to define his entire existence. The guilt would probably never fully disappear, but it was starting to transform from a crushing weight into something he could carry. Not easily, but carry nonetheless. There's something else, Marcus said. Something I realized while I was standing there. What's that? Morrison had 3 daughters, 8, 6, and 4 when he died. They're grown now. One of them, the oldest, she's about to graduate college. Emily posted about it on Facebook. Morrison's wife? He nodded. I found her profile years ago. I check it sometimes. Just to, I don't know. See how they're doing. And this daughter Jessica, she's graduating from nursing school, following in her dad's footsteps. He was a medic before he became a sergeant. How does that make you feel? It makes me think. He paused, searching for words. It makes me think that life went on. For his family, for his daughters. They grieved him, they missed him, but they didn't stop living. And His voice caught. I've been so focused on the fact that they died, I forgot that their families kept living. And maybe I'm allowed to keep living too. 6 months into therapy, we reached a crossroads. Daniel's graduation was 2 weeks away. I want to go, Marcus said. I really want to go, but I don't know if I can. Let's make a plan, I said. A detailed plan. What would make it possible? Over the next 2 sessions, we mapped it out. He'd visit the auditorium beforehand, when it was empty. To familiarize himself, he'd sit in the back row, on the aisle, near an exit. He'd bring noise-canceling headphones to reduce overwhelming sound. He'd have an escape plan if he needed to leave. He'd practice breathing exercises and grounding techniques. He'd give himself permission to leave if it became too much. This doesn't have to be perfect, I told him. You don't have to stay for the entire ceremony. Even if you're there for 10 minutes, you're there. That matters. The day after graduation, Marcus came to see me. He looked exhausted, wrung out, but there was something different in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. I went, he said simply. You went? I went. I got there early, sat in the back like we planned, and when people started filing in, when the noise started building, I thought I'd have to leave. My chest got tight, my heart was racing, I was sweating. But I stayed. I used the breathing exercises, I grounded myself. 5 things I could see, 4 things I could hear, 3 things I could touch. And I stayed. His voice was shaking now. The ceremony started. There were hundreds of people, music, applause, and every time the sound got loud, I thought I'd lose it. But I kept breathing, kept grounding, kept telling myself, you can do this, you can stay. And did you? I stayed through the whole thing, watched Daniel walk across that stage, watched him get his diploma, and afterward, he stopped, wiped his eyes. Afterward, I met him outside, and he saw me. And his face, he looked so happy, so surprised, and he ran over and hugged me and said, Dad, you came. You actually came. Marcus was crying now, really crying. 22 years of held grief pouring out. And I realized I'm still his dad, even after everything. Even after all the years I couldn't show up, I'm still his dad, and he still wants me to be. This was Marcus's reclamation of identity. For 2 decades, he'd defined himself solely by his worst moment, by his greatest failure. But in going to that graduation, in sitting through his fear, in showing up despite everything in him screaming to run, he was writing a new story. Not a story that erased the past, not a story that pretended the explosion didn't happen or that the guilt wasn't real, but a story that said, I am more than my trauma. I am more than my worst day. I am a father who struggles but tries. I am a survivor learning to live again. We continued working together for another year. The progress was never linear. There were setbacks. A car backfiring sent him to the ground in a parking lot. A news report about Iraq triggered a 3-day spiral of nightmares. A phone call from one of Morrison's daughters, who'd found him through a veterans organization, sent him into a panic that lasted hours. But there were also victories. Small, hard-won victories. He went to a grocery store at 4 p.m. on a Saturday. He lasted 10 minutes before having to leave. But he went. He attended a veterans support group. Heard other men and women tell stories that mirrored his own. Realized he wasn't alone. He started medication for anxiety, which helped smooth some of the sharp edges of his hypervigilance. He had dinner with Daniel at a quiet restaurant. Only stayed for 30 minutes, but it was 30 minutes more than he'd managed in years. He called Emily, Morrison's widow, and they talked for an hour. She told him she didn't blame him, that Morrison had known the risks. That war was chaos, and sometimes chaos wins. She told him Morrison would want him to live. He visited the other graves at Arlington, stood at each one, spoke to each man, said their names out loud. He enrolled in a trauma-focused therapy program at the VA, adding more tools to his recovery toolkit. He started walking to a park 3 blocks from his apartment. At first, only at dawn when no one was there. Eventually during the day when there were other people. Each step was terrifying. Each step was victory. Recovery from complex PTSD is a marathon, not a sprint. There is no moment when you're suddenly cured. No magic threshold you cross where all the symptoms disappear. Instead, recovery is a gradual expansion of your life. A slow rebuilding of your capacity to engage with the world. Marcus would probably always have some level of hypervigilance. Loud noises might always make him flinch. Crowds might always be uncomfortable. But he was learning to have PTSD rather than be PTSD, to carry his trauma without letting it carry him. The last time I saw Marcus in regular therapy, we'd transitioned to monthly check-ins, he told me something I'll never forget. "I still think about that day," he said. "Every day. I probably always will. I still hear the explosion, still see the smoke, still smell." He trailed off. "But now, I also think about other things." "Like what?" "Like Daniel starting college in the fall. Like maybe trying to go to one of his football games. Like possibly someday, dating again." He smiled slightly. "Like living." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I'm not who I was before Iraq. I'll never be that person again. That kid who thought he was invincible, who thought he had all the answers, he died on that road with Morrison and the others." He paused, breathed. "But maybe I can be someone new, someone who carries what happened but isn't crushed by it, someone who honors the men who died by actually living the life they didn't get to have." He looked at me directly. "I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive myself, but I'm starting to think that maybe I don't have to be perfect to deserve to exist. Maybe I can be broken and healing at the same time. Maybe that's what being human is." That's not a cure. There is no cure for what Marcus experienced. The trauma is permanent. The loss is permanent. The guilt, to some degree, will always be there. But he'd found something perhaps more important than cure. He'd found peace. Fragile, hard-won, imperfect peace. He'd learned that he could carry his past without being buried by it. He'd learned that survival wasn't betrayal. He'd learned that he could honor the dead by living. And that, in the end, might be the closest thing to healing that trauma allows. I hope this story has helped you look at your own life, your feelings, or the people around you with different eyes. I hope this story has helped you understand yourself and others better. I'd love to hear something about you in the comments, to get to know you and your story a little better. If you want to share what's going through your mind, you can write to the email address on my profile. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Click the bell icon to turn on notifications so you'll be informed about the next real-life story.